Welcome on Speak Your Mind. I'm your host, Shami Lochanlal. So, are there some psychological facts that will change a person's life? Everyone wants a happy life, stress-free life. But is there a magic? Is there a miracle? This is what we're going to talk about. And my guest is a psychologist, a very well-known personality in Fiji, Offa Swan. I'd like to welcome you on the show. How are you, Offa?
Thank you, Shami. And good afternoon to your listeners and viewers. And also thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to be able to come on your show and share with you the work that we do.
Mm-hmm. So a psychologist and a psychiatrist are often confused as having the same meaning. What is the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist?
Simply put, the psychiatrist is usually a medical doctor, and a psychologist is not. So that's the difference.
And you're a psychologist by profession?
Yes, by profession. As you said, I've got a past. Yes, I have. I had to change. And with anything we do in life and circumstances change, we also develop new strategies and new tools. Hence, I am now a psychologist.
Okay. So what do practicing psychologists do?
Firstly,
Do they make our lives happy?
All right. Firstly, let me just talk about the subject of psychology. That is a science that studies human behavior and mental processes. Now, you will find us in many areas, in different specialities, and many of us wear different hats at any one time. For example, clinical psychologist, counseling psychologist, school educators, development psychologist, social psychologist, sports psychologist, and health and community psychologist. We're in every sector. Now, to go back to your question, the point you made, can we make you happy? Well, there is a difference. No one can make you happy. Only the individual can. However, we can prescribe course of actions to help you find whatever you define or term as happiness. Now, let's be clear. A counselor in the Pacific has a reputation of advising and directing. As psychologists, we help the individual self-determine, become autonomous, and we empower them. Hence, you will find us in all areas.
So there is a difference between a counselor and a psychologist, you're trying to say?
There is a marked difference depending on your level of study. All right? As I said, we have counseling psychologists, and they work with individuals who have adjustment problems. And they do show seriously abnormal behavior, then they do counsel them. There is a small portion of that. But there is so much more to psychology than just counseling.
So who comes to see a psychologist?
People who have behavioral, maladaptive behavior and mental processes that are not seen as functional. They display dysfunctional behavior.
So then do you work with the medical doctors close hand in hand, or do you operate on your own? How does it work?
Since I started practicing, I've been fortunate enough to work out of the Suva Private Hospital or Myot, and I continue to do so. Majority of my clients or patients are referred to me by doctors. And now I'm also based at the Suva Physio Center 2 days a week, so that I can help people who do not wish to go into a clinical setting. The other alternative, and I'm now starting to see that there is more of a need, is visit people in their homes for relationships, for children. And that's gaining some momentum. But I don't advertise. It's just purely by word of mouth or the doctors.
So if you look at Fiji as whole, what is one area where the people of Fiji, we as Fijians, need help in? What is the most important focus where your services are needed?
I think we touched this the other day, Shami, the so-called codependency or culture of silence, the addictions that we have, whether it's with food, with substance, whether it's legal or illegal, or emotions of other people. And we don't talk about it. We tend to do a lot of whatever it is that's happening in our lives in secrecy, in silence. And that just promotes this codependent attitude or disease. Some have even called it disease.
Codependency, you mean to say? Being emotionally dependent on someone else.
On someone else, rather than being empowered to self-determine.
Do you come across any cases where you see a lot of emotional dependency on people? Would you like to give an example or a success story?
All right. When you... Most times people identify codependency with those who are using a substance and they're abusing it. So they become addicted, whether it's alcohol, cigarettes, you name it. The victims are the people who are supporting this person. They are then becoming codependent, all right? So they enable this person to continue by the way they behave. So what you try to do is you try to say to people to say, okay, this is the pattern, this is the condition pattern. This person will use simple terms as an alcoholic, for example. And we support that alcoholic person by saying that we will go and buy their beer for them when they want it because we feel sorry for them. It's just simple example. I'm generalizing. And instead of saying, no, you need to seek some help because it's taken over your life,
it becomes an addiction, right?
It becomes an
addiction. So
when
you talk about codependency, there is a lot of people who are emotionally attached to each other, in a marriage or maybe in a relationship. Do you see that as something that would harm them? Or because being emotionally dependent on anyone, could it be called an addiction?
Yes. It's two sides of hell, really. You should own your own emotions. They're yours. They don't belong to anyone else. But generally, because you're in a relationship, and when it all starts, you think that sharing each other's emotion is something that, will help your relationship. But many of us bring stressors to our relationship. And what we forget is that you, for example, and me, Shami, we get into a relationship and you have your own set of emotions, I have mine. And then the lines become blurred. We then forget that you as an individual own these emotions and I own my own. And we try very hard because we want to like each other rather than just being your own self.
Yes. So, Offa, we'll take a break, and I'd like to encourage our listeners on Gold FM to call us on 3220906 or 3220907. If you are struggling with any emotion, any addiction, or stress, or anything, is there a way where your problem could be solved? How can we get the psychologist involved in our lives for us to be able to come out of certain addictions? Can our lives be changed? So please do call us soon after this break. Welcome back on Speak Your Mind. The world is seeking for peace, for love, for attention. So that is why we thought to talk about something that could be of help to every individual. Now, Offa, half the population now suffers from anxiety, from depression, from stress, or some sort of substance abuse. How does seeing a psychologist help them from these addictions?
All right. Well, firstly, to simplify addiction, the person feels that they no longer have a choice to stop whatever it is that they're doing because it gives them pleasure. However, invariably, that pleasure will turn to pain. You see this in addiction. And as we talked about earlier, the addiction to other people's emotions. Now, one of the ways that we can address this is to actually see someone who's qualified, visit with a qualified practitioner so that you can be assessed. Unfortunately, with Google, everyone is self-diagnosing, so it's not going to help you. It's best to go and see a professional who will then help you.
You need to see a real person than someone on internet or by reading theory.
Face-to-face visit with a professional who will then help you make the assessment. The unfortunate thing is a person will think, oh, they've been sad for a while. I think I'm suffering from depression, anxiety. Self-diagnosis is not recommended. It is best to see a professional, and then after that, you can then make a decision. As a psychologist, we will prescribe a course of action on what you can and can't do, give you all the options. But ultimately, the choice is yours. It's up to the individual what they can and can't do. And a lot of these options are based on the character of the person, the personality, what they feel they can and can't do, and when they can and can't do. There's a whole range of factors that come into play.
So, what's the key to solving life's problems?
Well, is there such a key? If there is a key, I'd like to find one, Shami. A lot of the problems that are created, we create them ourselves. We take habits and beliefs from the past and continue with them today, and we don't check ourselves. We don't say, this behavior is sabotaging my potential. Let me use the workplace for an example. I'm just going to talk about BSP Life here and the visionary of their leadership on Malakai Nyanga and Michael Nathola, who said, come offer, see what you can do for us, because there is such a big gap, what the company expects from you and what the individual is putting out. So I went in there and we had a chat, and we had a look at things like attitude and belief. And a lot of the workers were not releasing their potential. Why? Because of all these attitudes and beliefs that they were carrying around with them, sabotaging their behavior in the workplace.
Which means to say, trying to say, how generally people don't like changes.
That's right. They get into a comfort zone. Earlier I opened with circumstances changing and then using and developing new strategies, new tools to help you in the new circumstances. A lot of us are too maybe tired, maybe fatigued, couldn't care less, don't want to change. That's the choice you make.
Yeah. See, Offa, if we look at Fiji's situation, suicide rate is very high. So there may be some who are listening who are going through this depression or who are suicidal. How would you comfort them? What are certain things they need
Please
to know?
see a qualified therapist. That's the only advice I can give you. I recommend, if you're having these thoughts or feeling suicidal, please see someone, talk to someone. Communication is all part of the healing process.
So if someone comes to me and says that I'm going to end my life, what should I do?
Well, firstly, you can calm and pacify the person, have a chat to them about why, and then make the phone call. Call someone you know who's qualified to manage this situation.
Because most of the times when situation does arise, when there is an argument or in a relationship or whatever disagreement, some may say things like this, and the other person, the second person, may not know how to address this. That's why I'm asking. Another very important thing that I have noticed is how we treat our children. Sometimes we tell them, you're good for nothing. You won't be able to do anything in life. How does it affect a mind, anyone's mind?
You are reinforcing negatives. This child will believe it and grow up feeling worthless and undervalued. I don't know if we have a newspaper here with us, but there was a beautiful picture on the paper on Saturday, the Minister for Women. And it was page 16, I think, Fiji Times. You've just brought this up, which reminded me of this photograph. All the women are smiling at the photographer. And if you look closely at this picture, there's one child there, Shami, bawling its eyes out. The child. And I'm thinking, everyone is oblivious to this child's pain. Which I just thought, so, this is what happens. We become oblivious to children's pain.
Yes. So, while we're talking about communication, how can we communicate more effectively with people?
Very simply, use the values. Use our values, Shami. You've got the value of respect, the value of honesty, the value of love, the value of truth. Use them, and if you're listening, use the value of empathy. only then can we listen to each other. Most of the time, people don't listen.
Yes.
We're all too busy talking about busyness. Our brains are so busy. I think we touched this the other day about
the brain,
the
yes.
hidden depths of our brains. Amazing. You know, whether we use psychological prescribed course of action to bring about long-term benefits, the change of the benefits of those change, or we use the healing powers of a placebo or hypnosis. But the brain is an amazing organ that has all the opportunities in there for us to bring about positive change. We don't utilize it enough.
Yeah, we normally tell people that, don't you have brains? So, I think it would be good to take a break, think about our brain, come back and talk about the brain, right? How can we utilize it? How much of our brain, what does it play in our mental stability? How does it play? Also, another question that I'm going to pose, when people go to see a psychologist, do you play with their mind and brain? Do you hypnotize? We'll take a break and be right back. Do call us after this break. Welcome back on Speak Your Mind. My guest is Ofa Swan, who's a trained qualified psychologist. We talked about brain earlier. If we all start using our brain, we will come to a great solution to most of the things we face in our lives. Tell me about the brain.
Well, that's funny you should say that, because we got the clinical training that I received was very important for me to understand emotions. And the emotions are seated in the amygdala, which is the place in the back of your brain. I mean, I remember this from school. It's just amazing. And now you use it when we have fight or flight or freeze emotions, and it's triggered in that part of the brain. So when you think about that phrase of using your brain, a lot of us just say it because we've heard other people say it. Why do we need to use our brain? What is it there for? From a psychological perspective, it's a very important organ because of your thought processes. When you think of something, it will evoke emotions, evoke action. All right? So it's a driving organ that tells the body what to do. So using your brain to bring about good, to bring about changes that are positive, that's a good thing.
So you can control a lot of behaviors.
Absolutely.
From what
From
happens
your
in
brain.
from your brain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Too often, though, let me say this, though, Shami, too often we're using it for a lot of nonsense. It's very busy. There's a lot of noise. We, like any part of your body, you need to give it a rest. And we utilize the gift of yoga, meditation, to pause, to rest the brain. We are now thinking all of the time. It's become to a point where you think you've got to think all the time. And it is seemed to be the norm, which it isn't. The brain needs to have peace and quiet and rest. And this is important if you're suffering from anxiety or depression. It is so important to quieten the brain. And I fear that we're not going to have that anytime soon, especially with all those earphones and the social media and people's drive to want more information, whatever it is that they want.
So when it comes to thinking, sometimes people say, don't think with your mind, but think with your heart. How does that relate to brain, mind, and heart?
They're all connected. Funny enough, we have 8 systems, and they're all connected to the brain. And if you're thinking with your heart, I tend to think you're thinking with your values.
So that's where...
The two, the connection for me. When you're using your brains, especially if you're going to be assessing a person, it's so important to have your values and also to utilize the therapies that have been for years experimented on and provided for our use now as psychologists the basis, the foundation of our work.
Let's go back to where we started. How do I know that it's time I should see a psychologist? Because we know when we have a headache or someone has NCDs, they know, okay, I need to go and see a doctor. When should a person realize that they need to see a psychologist?
Depends. It depends on your behavior. If you are presenting or exhibiting things like inattention, behavioral disorders, you're fidgeting, you can't focus on anything at any one time, you're having sleepless nights, you're constantly fatigued, you're snappy, you're angry, negative emotions come out to play, as I call it.
Do you think that we in Fiji are very ignorant of this?
Not so much ignorant. I think we know when something is wrong with us. We just don't know how to talk about it
And we do not know where to get help from.
and where to go and seek help. I just find it really concerning that people who have mild problems and do not utilize my skills but send them to St. Giles Hospital. Believe me, there's a reason for St. Giles, but I think sometimes we can overdiagnose and overprescribe medication when it could be just a simple thing like stress before an exam, for example, or too much workload, not good time management, things like that. And then you start to implode. And you can't sleep, you don't eat, you have sweats. All of these things come into physiological signs.
So you mean to say that instead of taking medications, there is help?
There
A
is
psychologist
help.
can help.
There is help. Granted, I work closely with doctors and I work closely with other practitioners, but it's important to know that there are options other than just getting medication.
But normally we see that doctors do not refer a patient to the psychologist. Why doesn't that happen?
I'm hoping it will change. Since I've been at the Suva Private Mayot, that has changed. A number of the doctors now send their patients to me because they find that a holistic, integrated approach is so much helpful to the individual rather than just one aspect.
Just this week, students have set Form 6 exams and where they'll be finishing exams. And then the most anxious moment, excited moment will be to wait for results. And you normally see that when we read newspapers, when we listen to news on our radio stations that someone committed suicide or something happened, parents were angry over child's result. What sound advice would you give to parents and students as they prepare or wait for the results?
I think setting expectations too high, that makes a real difficult task for the child. Instead, many of our nurturing techniques are not helpful to the child. They restrict their development and arrest their development because we anticipate and expect too much from our children, rather than allowing them to breathe and to be. We put a lot of our own beliefs and our attitudes on our children, and they absorb that. You know, funny enough, children very rarely listen to their elders, but guess what, Shami? They sure imitate them.
Yes. We normally load our children with what to fulfill our dreams. If I can become a doctor, so my child will become a doctor. Do you think that all brains are wired like that, or should parents realize what their talent is, which area will they excel, and then plan their career
That's
and
better.
education?
Yes. Have your child assess if they're having problems at school. You know, see a psychologist, an educational psychologist, and we have very good ones here in Fiji. And they're operating, so send them there to be assessed. It's just setting those high expectations and expecting them to perform creates a lot of stress and grief and anger and fear. Negative emotions build up in the child.
I know parents are now trying, because we are now dealing with a lot of millennials, right? Young people. And the way young people work, the tools they use, the equipment they use, the body language, the normal spoken language is so different. Parents may find it very challenging. How do we deal with them? What do we do to make things easy?
I always suggest to parents, go and learn. Go back and learn. Keep up with your children. Learn from your children. That's just the best way. You know, don't change your children to be something that they're not. Learn from them. Children can teach us so much, and we just don't listen.
Yeah. So listening is important. We'll take another break and we'll be right back. So do call us on 3220906, 3220907. You may have a pressing issue. You have questions related to any anxiety or any situation you're facing. You need help. Would you like to call us? And Offer is here to answer your questions. So when we come back, Offer, you have come on this show and I wanted to ask you, can psychologists solve all our problems? Wow. I'd like to know that, and I'm sure you'd like to know that too. Soon after this break. So this is Speak Your Mind on Gold FM. I'm Shami Lochan, your host on Speak Your Mind, and my guest is Offer Swan, a psychologist. So do you sell dreams? Are you able to solve everyone's problem?
Shami, the comment you made about whether we can solve everyone's problems reminds me of an article I read, and this is going back to World War II. The anthropologists Margaret Mead and Kurt Lewin, who is a social psychologist, were recruited by the U.S. government, right? The reason they were recruited was because they found that the public did not like to eat offal. Now, what the government wanted to do was send to the men and women on the front line their best cuts of meat. So they recruited these two serious brain power and said to them, find out how we can sell the public offal. So these two went about researching to discover why there was so much resistance to eating offal. And what they found was there was a stigma that offal was associated with poor people. And secondly, they just didn't know how to cook it. So what they did was repackaged offal, calling it variety meat, and then taught people how to cook it. Since then, it's become part of our dietary mainstay. So there you go. That's what psychologists can do if you team up with others.
That's when we started eating giblet and liver and
everything,
adding value, nutrient value to it.
We change
yes.
our behavior and our thought processes about a certain food item, for example.
I remember when we first met to discuss about this topic on Speak Your Mind, you mentioned to me that I'm thinking a lot of things. So when you meet people, how are you able to know that someone's thought process is very fast or what someone is thinking?
Generally, very fast in thinking, because I could see your eyes flittering and you're trying to figure out things and your whole body was tense. I mean, I'm just reading your body language and your facial expression, which is what we as psychologists read as well when we're in an assessment situation. Yes, so that tells me that, Shami's brain's going at 100 miles an hour. And when I asked you, you said it was. So just take a moment, be present. Are you familiar with the term mindfulness?
Yes.
Yes. That's being in the moment, being present, being real, and one thing at a time, one step at a time. But there is a catch. No judging in this process. You are not allowed to judge your behavior in this process.
So I shouldn't be afraid to go to a psychologist thinking that they may judge me.
Yeah, see, this is the thing. I know sometimes we're referred to as quacks, but let me just debunk that myth. A quack is usually a doctor, a medical doctor, who is practicing and is not qualified. And apart from that, we're not docs. Okay, that's one myth. And the other one is that we do not read people's minds. We're not clairvoyants. So that's something else we'd like to debunk while we're chatting. What we do is we assess all parts of your body, and usually we'll involve a clinical psychologist to have a look at your brain if there is a problem, send you to a psychiatrist even. But we work closely with others.
So when you meet people, how would you know that this person is a very confident person?
Just by their behavior.
What are those behaviors?
Generally, they are tall, they stand tall, their demeanors peaceful and calm, and they look you in the eye when they talk to you, and their body language is non-aggressive. They're very calm.
Let's do a demo.
Really?
So when you look at me,
Yes.
what can you tell about my
Well, you're
behavior?
calm in what you're doing. You're peaceful. You're not thinking of anything else right now, Shami. You're focused
I'm focused
on what
right
we're
now.
doing. And this is the kind of state we should do and present and behave most of the time, but we don't. We're very busy, very noisy.
We let other things affect our
Yes.
behavior, our emotions. It's a lot of distraction. So let's talk about social worker and a psychologist. Where do you
Interesting.
draw the line?
All right. The two both help. They're both helpers, but there is a difference. The social worker, in my view, address the symptoms. Psychologists address the root of that symptom. That's how I see it. But we work well together, but I don't think it happens enough. My sister's a social worker. She's a very qualified social worker. She taps into me all the time for her cases. So you have to work together. You can't work in isolation. And with a social worker, they'll act there and then when it comes to children, of violence. But you really need to go to the root cause of why these things are happening. Why is the behavior so aggressive, so violent?
Yeah. So, like today we are discussing about psychology, and you as a psychologist, you're a psychologist. Why is it so important, or is it important to Fiji to seriously look at this profession and to have more psychologists? How will it help Fiji as a nation?
Well, it would be great if we could become legislated for a start so that we can be licensed. At this time, think about it, Shami. We're working with people's minds and behavior. Why aren't we licensed to practice? It is so important, just like a doctor, just like a social worker,
So you,
a
you
psychiatrist.
yes, so you mentioned earlier that you've been working with doctors. So if someone is undergoing an operation or a major operation or under surgery, how does a psychologist help this person to go through that?
Ideally, it's like anything you do in life. The better informed you are about what is going to happen to you, the less concern and confusion it creates. We come into play in that sense. For example, when a woman has a hysterectomy, she is given a picture to explain to her prior, weeks before it even happens. She may opt out. Highlighting all of the body parts that's going to be removed and what will happen to her afterwards. That sometimes is forgotten.
Yes.
And
Often.
It's something that needs to be addressed today in Fiji. Before you go and have your leg amputated or any body part amputated, talk to someone about it. Have the doctor explain to you what the procedure is. Very clear, so you're sure in your mind it's what you want.
So it avoids the stress and prepares you mentally, and you don't go through so much trauma.
And the real question is, do you really need to have that body part removed? Is it a life and death situation? This is where we come into play and help you. Prepare yourself if it is going to happen.
So can a patient, when they go see a doctor or regarding mental health or anything, they go to some expert for advice, can they suggest and ask them that, would you refer me to a psychologist? Can
They
you help
can.
me?
They're allowed to. They must. But a lot of them don't know that
They
that
don't know.
service is available. It's like with me, Shami, in my work. I always eliminate the physiological aspect first before I can continue.
Okay.
If you have headaches, you're not sleeping well, I call up a colleague and say, a medical colleague, can you see this individual because of A, B, C, and D? And then only then I can come into play.
All right. We'll take a break and then we'll come back. We're going to talk about, address the issue of NCD, why NCD is such a big problem. I was in Hong Kong lately, and when I told them that I'm from Fiji, and the response was, Fiji, big people. We'll also like to talk to you after this break that how can I access services from a psychologist? How long does it take, the duration, etc.? Should I be fearful? So after this break, we're going to be in our last segment. Do call us if you have any questions. Remember, it's going to be our last segment on Speak Your Mind. This is our final segment on Speak Your Mind with Psychologist Offers One. So before we continue, let's talk about codependency
All right.
again.
Just very briefly, so that we can understand it. With codependency, the foundation of codependency, the very core of it, it's shame, blame, and guilt. That's the foundation of codependency. It's all wrapped up in one inside of you. Now, the antidote to this codependency, guess what? Very simple. Open, empathetic, respectful communication. Talking about your feelings, the guilt, the blame, the shame, whatever it is.
But we are not talking. People
No,
in Fiji, we don't talk.
no,
How
we
can
don't.
we encourage them to talk?
We need to encourage them because it'll manifest itself in other parts of your body and make you sick. Really make you sick. I've seen it. It's quite tragic. The years of carrying so much blame and shame and guilt, it does terrible things to you. It really makes you dysfunctional. And guess what happens? You are not living a healthy, well-balanced life. It takes away all the goodness. It sucks out the energy that's inside you. That's good.
So let's talk about NCDs. We eat more because our mind tells us to eat, because our habit. How can we get rid of this and NCDs in Fiji? What can we do? Tell ourselves.
Generally, I think it, like any addiction, food addiction. So if you think about it, a lot of us feel that we don't have the choice to stop anymore. It's really pleasurable, but then pain sets in after all of that. So what you need to do is have a look at your habits, your identity. What do you want to look like? And these are really little easy steps. I often say you just need to move a little bit more. Don't have to get fit, lose weight or anything. Just move a little bit more for each day. First day you move 5,000 steps. Second day you move 6,000, and so on and so forth. And you'll find that you'll start. This is very simple, very general, because you want to look a lot better than what you look at this time.
Okay. So let's talk about the sessions. If someone is interested to see a psychologist or come to see you, you're a psychologist, how long is the session?
The first session's usually the longest because you got to get history, you've got to go through a whole lot of questions. It's usually about an hour, 15 minutes.
So anyone could come to see a psychologist, come to see you, who's a psychologist, say, if they are going through mental disturbance, anxiety, emotional breakdown,
Yes.
marriage problem, medical conditions, anything.
Menopause.
Menopause.
Yes,
anything.
these are all conditions that I can work with them and work with a doctor as well.
Okay.
The two of us can work together to help this person recover or heal.
How long does it take to recover? How often should I, what is this time spent to see a psychologist?
Depending on the severity of your presentation or the issue, it depends entirely on the individual. It can take a month. I have had some really great, good stories where it's taken 3 months because the person has become so convinced that they can be self-determining and they don't want anyone else to get in that space. So the person makes that choice, that will be a lot more long-lasting. But if other people come into play, won't happen. It's up. See, I am a believer that every individual can self-determine.
Yes. So is it expensive to see a psychologist? How much does it cost?
Well, the first visit, if you go to the hospital, I think it's $99 for the first visit. And then after that, you have to pay a lot less. It depends. But the first visit's around in the hospital itself, or $100. I'm not sure which, because the billing system is different.
Yeah. So why do we dream?
Why do you dream? Well, as Freud says, it's usually your
This
subconscious.
is when we are asleep, and how does it relate to our well-being?
There's many schools of thought for this, Shami. when you read the Bible, dreams are not to be taken seriously. When you scientifically, it means something. It's up to the individual. I can't interpret your dream. There again, I'm not a clairvoyant.
All right.
But as Freud says, it's the subconscious coming to life.
Very quickly, before we conclude this segment, tell me about a success story in your profession you're proud of, where someone's life was saved. You might not want to mention names, but is there some that might encourage and may encourage people?
I think it's when a woman who's obese and says, I want to live, but I don't want to live with depending on medication. What can I do?
Mm-hmm.
And then you prescribe a course of action for a period of time, and 6 months later she's lost all the weight, her blood pressure's normalized. These are success stories.
Mm-hmm.
And she looks great, and she's got her self-esteem restored, and she's totally focused on her life.
Yes.
And she's become enlightened.
Mm.
And that to me is a success story, where she takes control of her life positively,
Mm.
not negatively, because there's a difference,
Yes.
positively, and she goes on to living a functional life. So can you imagine a person who's weighed over 120 pounds or something?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And then they lose weight just through psychology, but after seeing
Through
a
an
psychologist.
intervention.
Yes,
Through
yes.
an intervention, because she didn't want to take medication.
Yes.
She had serious
Yes.
blood pressure issues.
Yes.
But which was only a symptom of something even more deeper. But when she started to lose the weight, everything else fell into place.
So there are a lot of success stories. Lives get changed. There is a reason to live, coming out of negativity into positivity.
Yes, Shami, you know, every time I do my work, I'm reminded of Mother Teresa's, one of her phrases, and I want to share that with your listeners
Yes,
and your
please.
viewers. When you stop loving, you start judging. So judging is a curse. Let's all stop doing that and just accept each other the way we are, and we start loving. We don't have to love in the real sense of what people think, you know, just being respectful of one another and accepting rather than judging.
Yes, this will make life so easy for us. Offa, thank you very much for coming on the show. Certainly, I learned so much, and I'm sure you must have also discovered a lot of things through this discussion on the facts that will change one's life. So you can now spread this love, be an agent to change someone's life. And if you need to see a psychologist, please do get in touch with the Offa Swan. How do they get
or
in touch with you?
Call the hospital or the Suva Physio Centre. There's 2 places you can reach me.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Shami.
And you have a wonderful week, and you also have a very productive, healthy week. And see you on Speak Your Mind next Tuesday and Wednesday on FBC TV.